Poppy Playtime is dead. At least for now anyway. It's so dead right now that even Sheep Rampage isn't posting about it. But this series has changed drastically over the few short years that it's been around. It originally started off as a game that came completely out of nowhere, at least for me, and has very quickly turned into one of the most popular mascot horror games on the market. It's so big and so popular, in fact, that it even rivals Five Nights at Freddy's, and this might be a hot take, but if it carries on the pace that it is, it might even overtake it. But not only has this series had a huge surge in popularity, it's also had a drastic change in tone over the years as well. If you compare the latest chapter to the first two, they're almost like completely different games. But now that chapter 3 has been and gone and all we can really do is wait for news on chapter 4, this seems like a really good opportunity to take a look back over the series. Where did it all begin? Why did it have such a drastic change? And where can we expect it to go from here? Poppy Playtime released on Steam in October of 2021. It honestly feels like it was longer than that to me, but maybe that's just because I've made so many videos on it. Now this was a game that for me came out of nowhere. Until I saw it release, I hadn't heard anything about it. But seeing that big blue furry mascot, wait, that has a different meaning now. But seeing that big blue hairy mascot had me immediately intrigued, and I saw this really creepy idea that I don't think any other game has done so well before. These dolls of this giant toy corporation were so lifelike that they almost appeared alive. Now at this time I was already making horror theory videos, mostly on Little Nightmares, but I saw that this game looked perfect for theory content, so I decided to buy chapter 1 and install it on release day. And oh boy, I was not prepared for the titan this game was going to be. Now from a technical standpoint, chapter 1 was nothing special. It was only about an hour long and it honestly felt more like a tech demo than a full game, but even in that short amount of time, I was pleasantly surprised. The game may have been basic, but it was pretty fun. It had a few little puzzles with this mechanic I'd never seen before, the grab pack, which in itself is nothing groundbreaking, but it was pretty fun to go around high-fiving everything. Exploring the factory was interesting with a bunch of Easter eggs to find, and they did a pretty good job at building up the tension. It was pretty clear that something had gone very wrong here, and that was only reinforced by the idea that the factory had been abandoned 10 years ago. But it turned out that abandoned didn't mean empty. We met the mascot from the game cover pretty much straight away, and it turned out he would become one of, if not the most popular character from the series, Huggy Wuggy. I immediately knew something was up with him when I noticed his fur was moving. This was just one of many creepy details the devs added into chapter 1 to give us a hint that this was indeed a horror game, and sure enough, it wasn't long before Huggy went missing. But as we made our way towards the end of the chapter, Huggy for some unknown reason attacked. This was our first chase scene in the series, and honestly, it's one of the most memorable chase scenes in horror games for me. All that tension build-up that led to this point was paid off with a terrifying chase through these vents. But as if that wasn't cool enough, all around these vents we find warnings scribbled in different colours, all warning us of what is to come. When we managed to barely escape with our life, we moved into the final area, this creepy doll's house with an even creepier doll at its heart. Just like Huggy Wuggy, Poppy was alive too, something the trailer had already hinted at, and for whatever reason, she was being held captive in this case. That is, of course, until we let her out. All of this mystery was a really solid start to the series. While it might not have been the most technically amazing game, it didn't have the best graphics or the most complicated mechanics, it did get me very interested in the story. And it turns out, it got a lot of people interested in the story. Or, you know, the lore! Almost overnight, this game became a cultural phenomenon. Huge views on YouTube, everyone was desperately trying to figure out what it meant. I saw people in the streets with bootleg Huggy Wuggy plushies. True story, by the way. We even got to the point of the game hitting the news with teachers in schools worried about children playing it. Because of all the things to worry about in this day and age, people are still complaining about video games. But if you thought chapter 1 was huge, even I wasn't prepared for what was to come. In between chapter 1 and 2, the devs gave us a lot of build up for the hype for the next installment of the game. Not all of them were hits though. The best one by far was the first ARG for the game, the CCTV. A mysterious website was thrown up that had 3 live camera feeds from inside the factory in chapter 1. The coolest thing about this was that it was just basically thrown up and left there for us to figure out what it was. At first, none of them really showed anything, just these empty areas we'd already explored in chapter 1. But over time, things began to change. A cat bee was added, then it was dragged off somewhere, leaving only a trail of blood behind. Once again, we had no idea what was going on here. This weird hand appeared that honestly looked like the grab pack we'd used in the first chapter. We didn't know it yet, but all of this was building up the main antagonist of chapter 2. All we needed now was the grand reveal. Now, I have covered this topic before and I'm not one to beat a dead horse, so let's just say that the reveal for the name of the chapter 2 antagonist was a bit of a stinker. But what wasn't a stinker was the trailer that showed her off in all of her spider glory. Chapter 2 was bigger, better, and more YouTube clickbait milkable in almost every way possible. We got more puzzles, more Easter eggs, more lore, and more new characters than you could shake a knockoff Kissy Missy plushie at. I really mean it when I say Chapter 2 was a huge upgrade. This one actually felt like a proper game rather than a tech demo. It was much longer, the games we had to complete were creepy, and the introduction of new characters like Experiment 1006 in that moment were great for theories. But as great as Chapter 2 was, really it was just planting the seeds for Chapter 3. At this point, the game was still in this cute and cuddly era. While yes, the game had elements of horror and the chases were tense as hell, a lot of the really scary stuff was just implied. We saw toys covered in blood but were given no explanation as to why. We knew something terrible had happened here, but still didn't know what it was that caused this factory to be abandoned. It was as if we were only at the tip of the YouTube iceberg video. And that's because we were, and we would be, until we started to get the first hints for Chapter 3. There was a long wait between chapters 2 and 3, a much longer wait than between the first and second chapters anyway. But once again, we got a bunch of teasers to tide us over. This time the ARG was much bigger with lots of riddles for the community to solve. We got multiple trailers, even more than last time. And on top of that, we got 3 full episodes of teaser videos for the new chapter. Each one featured a different main character and showed off a completely different side to the game than we'd seen before. We were just getting our hints on how dark Chapter 3 was really going to be. These videos really were much more mature. In fact, this one even had to be censored after it was released on YouTube. All of this build-up had one thing in common. It was much darker than the previous 2 chapters. And this was true of Chapter 3 as well. This game started in much the same way that the previous one ended. The factory still had that same charm to it, but very quickly, things took a turn for the worse. The deeper we got into the playcare, the main area of the 3rd chapter, the more it became apparent that this time was different. Just like the trailers before it, this chapter felt much darker than before, both literally and figuratively. This time though, the stakes were raised higher than my blood pressure playing Dead by Daylight. Just like Chapter 2, this chapter was bigger, badder, and uglier than ever. We had more areas to explore, more puzzles to complete, and this time, way more enemies to avoid. But not only were there more of them, these ones were more involved too. Rather than just scripted chase scenes, now we had swarms of smiling critters, a full-fledged boss fight, and who can forget getting schooled by everyone's favourite academic, Mr. Light. In some ways, Chapter 3 felt like a completely different game. We finally saw a dead body, our first one in the series, and the chapter ended off with the VHS for the Hour of Joy, which was just glorious. Not only did we get our first dead body in the series, we saw all of them, and we learnt why there weren't any more during chapters 1 and 2. They'd all been dragged below and eaten. But if you track the trajectory of these 3 chapters, you can see they are going in one clear direction. This series really isn't messing around anymore. I'm not entirely sure what's changed, but the devs definitely aren't pulling any punches now. But what does that mean for the future, for Chapter 4 and beyond? As they say, the catnap is out of the bag now. I really don't think they could tone down this horror without disappointing fans, so you can bet that Chapter 4 will be just as dark, if not even darker than Chapter 3. Chapter 3 ended with Kissy Missy sounding like she was being attacked. I don't think she's going to come away from that unscathed. We have some pretty strong evidence that the area we were travelling to was a prison of sorts, so I'm sure that's where Playtime Co. kept the most dangerous experiments. After all, the ones we have faced off against so far have all been ones that were allowed to interact with the children and the general public, and look how horrible they turned out to be. Imagine the ones that weren't allowed around people. I'm still convinced that Huggy is alive, and we're going to see a damaged and much more aggressive version of him. After all, he has been shown to be incredibly violent in 2 VHS tapes now, and we really didn't get to see this side of him in Chapter 1. So his revenge arc would be a perfect excuse for the devs to raise the stakes even higher. Possibly even a face-off between him and Kissy. I think we can safely say we will see new characters. This seems to be a staple of the series now. Mommy Longlegs was introduced as a brand new character for Chapter 2, Catnap and the Smiling Critters alongside Mr. Light were added for Chapter 3, so I'm sure Playtime Co. has some brand new toys for us to play with in Chapter 4, or, let's be realistic, new toys to play with us. But overall, I think the chapter is only going to get darker from here. This will be the deepest we've gone in the factory so far. This whole area is a sealed off part of what is already essentially a bunker. There has to be a reason why it was locked up like this, and judging by what we've seen so far, I'm willing to bet it's because this is the most dangerous area yet. Poppy did say all the bodies were dragged below, and we're heading, well, below, so I think we're going to see the toys' feeding ground. And they are still alive, so I'm willing to bet that we're going to see exactly how these toys feed and what is left for them to feed on. Either way, we're in a bit of a lull for Poppy content right now. You might have noticed I've not really been posting much lately, and it's just simply there isn't a lot to talk about. There isn't really a lot we can do aside from speculate or wait for some teasers or a trailer or something to keep us going, and we have been told that there is something coming. I can't really share any details, so we're just kind of waiting. And Little Nightmares 3 is coming out this year supposedly, but we still don't have a release date for that. And as soon as the stuff picks up for Little Nightmares, I'll be jumping back on it. As soon as we have something to talk about with Poppy, I'll be jumping back on it. But I quite like this style of video as a bit of a filler in between the theories. So if you like this video, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll make more of it, stuff like this. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, leave it a like. Let me know down in the comments below what you've been doing lately, and as always, I'll see you next time.